Okay, let us get started. What if I told you that empathy, the thing that people often call naive, soft, or even woke, is actually the bravest skill you can have? Today's episode, we're going to be covering why empathy scares people, how it's misunderstood as a weakness, and how we can actively strengthen it. You're listening. You're listening to Fed Up and Figuring It Out, unpacking politics, culture, and global power. If you ever thought, why does this all feel like bullshit? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Priya Mignot. As always, everything cited throughout this episode will be in this episode's description. Today's episode is largely about empathy, and we're going to be talking a bit about what it is, how we strengthen it, and the discourse around it in our society. Because empathy often is seen as like people are empathetic or like it's an individualistic characteristic, but it's actually a skill and a trait that people have to strengthen over time. It's not just something you have, it's something you build. We're going to be exploring what empathy really means, why it absolutely terrifies some people, how it strengthens leadership, because empathy doesn't make you fragile, it makes you human. And in a world that profits off division and distraction, that's kind of revolutionary. Empathy is one of the most humanistic traits we have. Let's start at the beginning. Before we can talk about why empathy scares people, we have to talk about what it actually is. Because empathy isn't the same as kindness, it isn't the same as pity. Empathy is not synonymous with those two things. Empathy means feeling with people, not for them. You are actually putting yourself in someone else's shoes and feeling what it is to have their embodied experience when you're practicing empathy. It is this difficult skill that not everyone grows up practicing, but it's also not a skill people are naturally born with often. It's a skill that is built throughout childhood and continues through adulthood, but it's this idea that when someone is having a hard time, you sit with them in the same emotion. You're not trying to be like, oh, that sucks. But it's like, okay, you can say that sucks, but it's like, if you're there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is when you're like, oh, that really sucks. And you're like, oh, and keep an arm's distance. Empathy is when you're feeling it with them and you're more understanding of where they're coming from and what they're going to do next in their actions. Brené Brown said it best. Empathy fuels connection and sympathy drives disconnection. Because, again, sympathy creates this kind of distance and it almost says like, oh, poor you in your situation. And empathy kind of says, no, I'm with you. I'm here for you. I'm in this with you. And that's very different things. And I think, especially in our like current modern day, and I think, I guess for all of human history, those two have often been used interchangeably in conversation, but they're not the same thing. Sympathy doesn't allow for change necessarily. It says, oh, that sucks. But it doesn't hold anyone to like want to change that or change the situation necessarily. When you're being empathetic towards someone or towards a group of people, you naturally want to change the situation and change the issue or fix the issue that they're in because you're kind of feeling it with them and you're like, oh, this is what it would feel like to be in this situation and it's absolute garbage. Sympathy is not, oh, this is what it would feel like to be in this situation. It's, oh, that sucks that you're in that situation. So they're very different things, and I think often people are like, when they say that they have empathy, they mean they have sympathy. Because sympathy's easy, and empathy is actually quite a difficult skill. And that's partially because empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice. It's not just that it naturally happens. It does sometimes, but you're making the choice to feel with the person, and that's very vulnerable. Again, like there's a bit of a difference too, because sympathy, sometimes you'll have people say like the beginning of the conversations will be like, at least you're in this situation and not this situation, or like give you a silver lining to the shitty situation you're in. For example, let's say your house burns down, someone's house burns down. Sympathy would be going, well, at least you have savings, at least there's insurance, there's a silver lining, you could pick a new house. Empathy is not that. Empathy is like, oh, this must suck. Like this sucks because obviously like you've had a home. This was your home. And on top of that, like maybe you had like photographs in that house and you had childhood things in that house and this is where your kids were raised in that house or whatever the situation is. But empathy is like, I'm here with you now. We don't need to talk about the insurance. We don't need to talk about the next steps. We can be right here, right now, dealing with all these emotions that are coming up because your house just burnt down. So there's like a very different approach with both things. And as much as empathy is like a very emotional and vulnerable practice, it's still important to have boundaries emotionally. In her book, The Power of Vulnerability, Brené Brown explains that empathy demands emotional boundaries. You can stay present without being consumed by these feelings. You don't have to fix the things. You just have to witness them with someone. You just have to be there for someone. And you don't have to rescue someone from their situation. You have to respect the situation that they're in. And so I think that's a bit of a challenge too, is that when you're feeling all these emotions, which again, there is a limit to how much you can take on empathetically, you're not in the role to fix the situation. You're in the role to be there with the person so that they feel less alone. Or also just to understand the situation better and be like, oh, okay. Not so that they feel less alone, because sometimes that's not what you're trying to do it for. Like if you're doing it like for a group of people, it's more to understand why their actions and like why they would do the things they do. And that's still important. And to be honest with you, that is kind of the hardest part with empathy, is like staying present instead of like running from that and turning it into sympathy. And I mean, for me, I've had this happen because I was diagnosed with endometriosis and I've had symptoms since I was 10 years old. And for those who don't know, endometriosis is a issue that affects 1 in 10 women. It's a disease. But it basically is like, it shares all the same hallmarks of cancer, which is insane. And now there actually is treatment and testing being done with cancer-related drugs on endometriosis patients. But it's an incurable disease. And it basically just is like your organs slowly fuse together with scar tissue. And so it like cuts off blood supply and like causes all these other issues. Everyone with endometriosis kind of has different symptoms. And last year I was really struggling with mine. I didn't know what to do. Like the doctors, again, like it's not very well researched because it's women's healthcare. And there isn't a lot of treatment plans. Like there's surgery and birth control, which birth control doesn't actually fix the problem and neither does surgery fully, but surgery helps. But I digress. Anyhow, I was having a really hard time with the disease and it was really affecting my life and I didn't know what to do and all this kind of stuff. And I was really down and depressed last year, but because of it. And the amount of times I got told, at least it's not cancer, is ridiculous. Because it doesn't matter. It still sucks. And they're like, oh, at least it's not cancer. It's like, what? Like that's not helpful at all. That doesn't make me feel better. I understand this whole self-pity thing isn't good, but the at least or the silver lining about having an incurable disease that affects every aspect of my life is that it won't eventually kill me. And like it still could kill you. That's the thing too with endometriosis. It still can kill you. But anyhow, I was just like, that's insane. So that's a situation where these people who have told me at least it's not cancer could have invoked better empathy. And I think about that all the time because they were being sympathetic. They're like, oh, that sucks, but at least it's not this. And it's like, that's not what I'm looking for. That doesn't help the situation at all. That doesn't make me feel better about the situation at all. So it's very invalidating too when someone says at least. Like it's like, okay, so my feelings aren't valid unless the worst possible scenario happens. I think that's just important too, is that there is a very distinct difference between empathy and sympathy. And it is important that we recognize that. And it is important to approach people with empathy who are in difficult situations. Like if they come to you in a difficult situation, it's important that you reach out with empathy and not sympathy. And so if empathy isn't a personality trait, what is it? And more importantly, can we get better at it as a whole, as a society? And this is the good news. Empathy is a skill, not a trait. It can be learned, practiced, and refined, kind of like a muscle. Most people, and like myself included, you don't just wake up one day and be empathetic. You have to go through repetition and reflection. And it takes a lot of time to strengthen those kind of muscles. It's kind of like playing a sport. Eventually it'll feel natural to empathize with other people, but until you get that point, you have to work at it. And I think growing up, I think a lot of us learn empathy from our parents, but that's also not true necessarily because not everyone has great home lives. I was really fortunate, and like my parents taught me really great skills about empathy, um, and like responsibility to community and all these different aspects. But I know a lot of households and a lot of my friends didn't grow up that way. And so I've had the benefit of having a stable household and learning empathy as a child, like through children's books or through the way my parents interacted with each other or with society. But that does not mean that you can't learn empathy later in life. That doesn't mean I should stop practicing empathy because again, it is this muscle. If you don't use it, it gets weak. And if you use it enough, it just becomes automatic. And so there's a couple ways to build empathy that I think might be the best way to do it. It's reading stories that are outside yourself or watching films that make you uncomfortable in a good way. That can just be like watching a show or reading a book from a different narrative than you're used to. And it's just like little things where it's like maybe it's important to read stories and watch films from people who are different from you. It's not difficult to practice empathy for people who are like you and look like you because it's almost like looking in a mirror and you're like, oh, that could happen to me. So the that's kind of like the base layer of empathy is learning how to empathize with people who are like you and then going one step past that, which is so vital and so important and you have to do it. But it's going past that and being able to empathize with people who are not like you, who maybe aren't the same gender, who aren't the same race, who aren't from the same place in the world, who like it could be the exact opposite to you in every conceivable way and being able to empathize with them. And so that I think really comes down to listening to stories, and watching films and TV shows from different narratives. And that kind of builds that empathetic bubble. Listening to people without interrupting is also really important in fostering empathy. And like not needing to respond to fix the situation, just letting it be. Like listening to someone, actively listening, and then talking it through with them, but not being like, why don't you just do this? Like it's good to find solutions to problems, but when the goal is empathy, that's not what you're trying to do. Because it's like if someone just dumps this whole problem on you and like, this is what I'm going through and this is what's going on. And you're like actively listening, but then you're like, okay, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Or why didn't you do this? It's like you're not giving any space, and this is where the vulnerability comes in, any space to sit with those emotions and be there with them. You're just trying to figure out how to get out of that hole so you don't have to deal with the emotional aspect of it. But it's like, okay, first things first, if someone's telling you their problems, what I would recommend is sitting back, actively listening, feeling through with that and being like, oh my gosh, this sucks. Like, and like, giving them a safe space to feel what they're feeling it kind of with them, and then being like, hey, would you like me to give you a couple ideas I have for solutions? Or would you rather or do you just kind of need a soundboard right now? That's such an important question that people don't ask. And I think that's like a huge thing with practicing empathy. And this kind of ties into like, you have to ask yourself, okay, what might this situation feel like? If your friend or whoever is telling you their problems, and then you have to put yourself in their shoes and be like, okay, what might the situation feel like? Instead of, what would I do to solve the situation? That isn't always necessary. Usually the person who is going through the problem knows the solution, knows what they have to do next. But that's not why they're telling you. They're telling you so they can get it off their psyche, so that they can not feel so alone in the world. And so going straight to like solution problem and like solutions is like okay sometimes, but more often than not, the person knows what to do. They just need a space to breathe with someone else and not be isolated in that. Everyone has problems that feel larger than life sometimes. And it's the ability to put yourself aside and feel with someone else. And I think we often get caught up in our own little worlds, which is totally fair, and I totally understand it. It's hard, but you have to be able to step out of your own little world. Even when you're facing like challenges you don't know how to fix. Even when you're dealing with your own shit. And that's not to say neglect it. That's not to say open up to every single person and do all that kind of stuff. But it is saying everyone's got shit. Everyone's got baggage. Everyone's got things they're dealing with that feel larger in their life, whether it's a diagnosis or finances or a loved one or grief, whatever it is. We all have that kind of crap on us. And empathy is being able to say, okay, I have all these problems. I'm not going to neglect them. I'm going to put them aside for a minute here, though, so that I can be with this person and help them deal with a little bit of theirs. And that's a really difficult thing. And I think in our modern day, we are missing a lot of community. And I've heard this from so many people, is that we're missing community because of this reason and this reason and this reason. And I would agree that it is a multitude of reasons on why we are lacking community and lacking culture in some ways in our Western world. A lot of it is because we are so individualistic, and that is not meant to be a slight against every person in the Western world. I know not every person is, but it is the way our society and systems are designed to make people individualistic. And that individualism makes people feel like they are the center of the world. And to be fair, like, you are the center of your own world. That kind of how it is. We're not put on this earth, and this is like more of a spiritual thing, but we're not put on this earth to just be me, 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 me. It's like, you're put on this earth for connection. We are people, we are humans. Our natural ability is to connect with other people. And so you almost have to take the individualism out of it for a second and be like, okay, yeah, I'm still the center of my world. I still have me to worry about later today. And like, don't neglect yourself, but at the same time, connect with other people. Be willing to sit with other people. Deal with other people. Like, we are here to help each other. That is the point of all of this. This is the point of this, is that we help each other. And that means putting away your baggage for 3 seconds to help someone else. And then that would also mean vice versa. Like, when you're going through a really tough time and you need to get something off your shoulders, that friend that you helped would help you. And that's not to say it should be transactional, but it's like, that is the point of a community. That is the point of that's the whole point of human society. I am definitely a little bit more concerned nowadays because people today are avoiding empathy. They are like actively avoiding being empathetic. And like, we can see this with people talking to AI instead of their friends. Like, and we've seen multiple case studies of this across the world where people are talking to AI about their mental health. They're talking to AI like it's a friend or a lover or whatever it is, to try and fill that gap in their social life, to fill that gap in their emotional community. That's like really concerning because AI doesn't have empathy. Like, it has no empathetic skill set. And that, again, that's a uniquely human trait in some ways. And I would argue that I would say that empathy is actually in more species than just human, but it's not an AI. And so people are avoiding talking to other real people, or like their dog even, and they're talking to a robot. And the robot, again, like, that doesn't foster any empathy for you, and that thing can't feel empathy. You could even argue that empathy is kind of on a decline as a skill, because our dopamine scrolling brains on like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all this kind of stuff, we kind of get like 20-second clips of someone's story, and we don't get the full picture. And so when you don't really have the full picture necessarily, or like even a quarter of the picture, it's really hard to empathize with people. So we're seeing person after person after person on our phones with no pause to connect to them. And that's not normal. So that's also concerning, is that like, they're going to AI. We're not connecting on social media either. The bigger question is, if empathy is a skill that we can learn, why are so many people so afraid of it? Like, if everyone can do it, why are people afraid of it? And why do we treat it like it's dangerous, or even worse, political? Because let's face it, empathy has become somewhat controversial, which is super weird. And you can kind of see this with the fear of empathy is actually just woke backlash. I put that in quotations. Because a lot of people are like, oh, we're against wokeism now. We're against the word woke. And it's like, often being woke just means being empathetic. I hate to burst everyone's bubble there. The word woke originally meant being awake to injustice, aware of how systems harm people differently. And it starts out as an awareness, but once you're aware of a situation, you become more able and more reactive in empathizing with the people in that situation. It's like as soon as you notice that that's like the wokeism, is like noticing that the system is built for some people, but not all people. And the wokeism, again, is noticing the people that are left behind by the massive systems we've created. Like looking at the system and being aware of the system is not empathetic in itself. However, over time, being woke has turned into an insult and a weapon to shut down empathy. It's like you're being too woke. And it's like, no, I'm actually just empathizing with people who are different than me. That shouldn't be woke. That shouldn't be revolutionary or terrifying to the ruling class. I had an experience like this in high school. One guy I was friends with for a long time. It was a bunch of things were happening, obviously, in 2020. And that's kind of when this conversation came about. But it was like we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. We were talking about non-binary people. And we were talking about abortion access in the States. And like all of these things were kind of coming to a head in 2020 or coming up in 2020. And this friend of mine was very on the opposite political opinion than me and a lot of our friend group. And so we kind of tried to talk to him about it. We're like, hey, like we don't agree with this, yada, 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 because of these reasons. And like he sent a video to our big group chat making fun of non-binary people, which wasn't cool. And it was just like this weird thing where it was like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so he sent this video to this group chat, and I didn't appreciate it. A lot of people in our group chat didn't appreciate it because we obviously knew non-binary people. We were friends with non-binary people. We're like, this isn't cool. It's like, I know that all of us were homeschooled, but man, oh man, you got to leave your bubble here, buddy, a little bit. And we were telling him that like, that's not cool, whatever. And he goes, well, don't be mad at me because I'm not woke. Like, you can't be, I'm not woke enough for you. Is that what it is? And I was like, how do I explain that it's like you don't have empathy and you don't have a clear understanding of people who aren't like you? It's not a flex to not be woke. Like, I need people to know that. It's not a flex to not be aware of the systems that benefit people and don't benefit people. It's just ignorance. And for that friend especially, I was like, you are in high school. You have friends that are not, who are in the LGBTQ plus community, who are women, who are of color, like, who are of different economic classes. You have the opportunity to expand your bubble so much more than you are, and you don't want to. And that is where the problem lies. So actually, our friend group kind of dissolved after that. And yeah, obviously I'm not friends with him anymore. But that was like such a weird thing for me, whereas he's like, I'm not woke enough for you. I'm like, how do I explain that it's not that you're not woke enough for me? It's that you just don't want to care about something outside yourself, and you don't want to understand things outside yourself. In recent years, we've kind of seen more and more people talk about wokeness like it's bad. And this is like Trump's war on woke, which was part of his campaign and now part of his government. And like part of Trump's plan to attack wokeness in America was like getting rid of the critical race theory, which is talking about how America was built on the backs of slaves. It showed the actual picture of how America was built, and not this like whitewashed male version of it, okay? And that was like, we need to get rid of that. Like, because that's too woke. It's too woke to know what actually happened. It's too woke to understand the systems and how they were created and how they still affect people to this day. There's also been a rise in anti-woke propaganda and stuff and rhetoric across Germany and across Europe. And even here at home, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party in this last election, has sworn against the woke ideology. As a CTV article points out, Poilievre has threatened to pull back federal funding from universities over alleged ideological slant. And so the question is like, where have we heard that before? And the Canadian Association of University Teachers has said it's alarmed by the suggestion of political interference in well-established independent process for allocating federal grants through peer review. The association's president, Peter McInnes, says, quote, "The word woke is now so vague that it could mean anything. It just means things that they don't agree with," end quote. And that is like the really big concern, is that there is not a solid definition for woke. And when people are like, we're anti-woke, this wokeness has got to go, like the war on woke. It's like, wokeness can mean anything. It just means something you don't agree with. And I think, especially like we've had this with Pierre Poilievre and Trump. And now even recently, Danielle Smith, Alberta's premier, has said like they're anti-woke. A part of it's like the universities are too woke. They're too woke. And it's like, You mean awake? Like aware of the systems in place, the things that they have to teach about. For you to have a full understanding of the world, you have to be taught about the systems that are in place that create the whole society we know now. And also then knowing who it is made to benefit and who does not benefit. And how that all trickles in to the grand scheme that we see today. And they're considering that woke. And I'm like, that is actually just education. You are afraid of people knowing education, which is super weird. Like again, that ties into fascism, and obviously you can watch my video on that. Just recently, Alberta's premier, just in the last month, has said that they are trying to end wokeness. And then like a bunch of people cheered, and it's like, what are you cheering for? Could you even define what woke is? Like if you're like, oh, it's understanding systems, or it's like, we're being too lenient towards people who are minorities. And it's like, you mean we're having empathy and we understand how the systems don't benefit them and we're trying to make sure it's more equalized? It's like I don't know. I just don't think people hear themselves talk sometimes, is honestly. Or they don't think about anything they say sometimes, is what I think sometimes. But targeting wokeness is typically a more far-right move. These people who attack wokeness, they don't want to define what woke is. And they're trying to like almost instill this fear in people of people who are different from them. Like it's like, oh, we don't want to be woke. You don't want to be woke. Woke's bad, woke's bad, woke's bad. And it's like, you mean understanding and empathizing with people who are different than me? That's the bad part. That's the thing I should be scared of. That's the boogeyman for politicians. And you can think about this like in terms of like politicians attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, transgender people, or environmental protection. Like all of these things that are considered too woke is just trying to equalize the playing field in a society and that is built by systems that don't leave an equal playing field. And so often when you ask someone who's against wokeness what wokeness is or what woke is, they will have these like, they'll say these like random, seemingly disconnected things. But what they're actually saying is they're against people noticing how unfair and disconnected the structures and systems that dictate our society are. They are afraid to empathize with people, and that makes them weak. The people who are against wokeness are typically afraid of empathy. They're afraid of what it can mean. They're afraid of relating to people who aren't like them. Not being able to face up to something, not being able to confront something, not being able to know the truth about something is weak and cowardice. What is more weak than not being able to face up to the truth? And so when people say wokeism is destroying our society, they often mean I'm uncomfortable with being asked to care or empathize with people who aren't like me. I do not want to put myself in their shoes. I don't have to. I like my little bubble because it benefits me. And in the end, the systems that we have in place don't actually benefit any individual person. But it's like they just don't want their bubble to burst. Because once they realize the systems are in place, they're going to be like, oh, this actually doesn't benefit me. Like patriarchy doesn't benefit any gender. Or capitalism, or like all these different systems in place. It's like, yes, there's pieces of it that you could probably pull into the new world and that you like and are good. But for the vast majority of it, once you become aware of the systems, you're like, oh, these actually don't benefit anyone. And then your entire worldview collapses because it's like, I was told these systems helped me. And so I think that is honestly the weakest part, is that they don't want to face up. They don't want their bubbles to pop. And it's like, your bubble's gotta pop. It's gonna pop. And you can live your entire life without having your bubble pop, but like, what a untruthful existence you've lived. Empathy is not ruining society. It threatens the comfort of people in these bubbles. It forces people to reflect and say, maybe I've benefited from systems that hurt other people, that continue to hurt other people. And again, like that is kind of unbearable to people. And especially these politicians who are pandering to the demographics that can't handle it, it is unbearable to them to practice empathy and to understand the systems that they live in. Because once you understand the systems you live in, and once you've practiced empathy and you have gone beyond just those who are like you, it shatters the illusion of innocence and superiority. So if you've thought, I'm innocent, I have nothing to do with these things, it's like, yeah, the systems that are built, you didn't necessarily start them, but it is now our job to dismantle them or figure out a way to make them work for everyone. And a lot of people just don't want to do that. They're like, I'm innocent in it. I have nothing to do with it. It's like, as soon as you know that you live in a bubble and that bubble pops, you are no longer innocent to it. You have an obligation. If you want to be a good person, you have an obligation to look at those systems and figure out how to help everyone from them. And that's like a thing I think our society is really afraid of in some ways, because a whole pillar of colonialism and capitalism is individualism. And especially in North America, colonialism and capitalism are like the founding pillars of our nations. And that is not meant to be rude. I love being Canadian, but it is just the truth of the matter. Like, Canada wasn't, Indigenous people were here first. They were here first. And there was entire societies here. And the foundation of Canada wasn't the French and British. It was the French, British, and First Nations people, and Indigenous people, and Inuit people, and Métis people who were here. And anyhow, so the point is that under colonialism and capitalism, individualism is like important for both. It's a pillar of both ideas. It's the idea of thinking of oneself outside of the whole. It is thinking you are separate. You are not a part of the whole. And empathy ruins that. It makes you realize that actually, no, we are all collectively in this whole. And yeah, you can be an individual person in it, but you are not exempt from the actions within the society we've built. And so rather than face discomfort, people often attack the concept itself. They'll say, like, stop being so sensitive. Or they'll dismiss inclusion because they're like, it's too woke. And the fact that woke is now seen as derogatory in some contexts shows that it's often easier to mock empathy than to practice it. The people that attack empathy, they don't fear empathy because it's weak. They fear it because it's powerful. Once people start seeing each other, it becomes harder to scapegoat, to divide, and to exploit. And those are things that kind of have to happen under capitalism. And so once you don't have that, well, that's fearful for a lot of people. For example, if you can empathize with refugees, it's harder to justify border cruelty. If you empathize with queer kids, it's harder to pass hateful laws against them. And so, like, empathy threatens hierarchies that are built on apathy and ignorance. Tying back to good old Brené Brown, she mentions that dehumanization is the prerequisite for cruelty. You can't harm people you see as fully human. That's why empathy is dangerous to systems built on fear. You don't want to hurt someone you empathize with. You will actively try to avoid hurting people you empathize with. And so once people practice empathy and they understand it as a skill and they're good at it, it's like, well, why would I be a part of the system that disenfranchises so many? And I now empathize with their situation. Here's a secret I think a lot of people don't understand, is that people with empathy struggle with empathy too. I struggle with empathy sometimes because it's a lot and it can lead to burnout. And especially if you're trying to empathize with every single thing that's happening on the planet, you just can't do it. And in your individual community on top of that. Because once you see something, you can't turn away from it. Like, that is, once you've become good at empathizing and understanding situations and as soon as you're aware of a situation, it's like, I have an obligation to understand it. So that is also the hard part, is you're trying to balance, like, how it's a vulnerable practice, and on top of that, it's kind of emotionally exhausting if you don't know where your boundaries are. As Gloria Steinem once said, quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off," end quote. And I think that's so much with empathy, is like, as soon as you start to empathize with other people, you're like, oh, this is such a piss off. Like, that shouldn't be the case. Why is that happening? And so it's like, that is setting you free from this bubble you're stuck in, from this ignorant bubble you're stuck in. But at the same time, it's like, that'll piss you off because you're like, why are we even doing that? Like, why? As soon as you empathize with someone, it's like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. And then that is why it's dangerous to systems of power. The part that I find really scary with empathy and hard to deal with sometimes is that you become emotionally invested in things and you open yourself up to heartbreak when things don't go the way you hoped. For example, a new law gets passed that's discriminatory. A species that you've been in awe in becomes endangered. A leader who fundamentally represents the worst in humanity is elected. All of these things hurt. They hurt you because you are now empathetically tied to the people that it affects. That can be exhausting. But I'll leave you with this, is that Brené Brown says, quote, "Love with your whole heart, even when there's no guarantee," end quote. You only get one life, and you might as well leave it all out in the field, to be honest with you. What is the point of having your entire life and living in such a remarkable world with such remarkable people and not using your abilities and using your feelings to empathize with others. You're going to be dead one day anyway. You might as well just do. Why not feel everything you could possibly feel while you're here? And here's the irony, is that the people who often call empathy weakness are in positions of power. Yet, empathy is one of the most important skills for leadership. Some would argue that empathy weakens decision making, but in fact, it actually strengthens it. It builds trust, retention, and innovation. And this has been studied. Like, empathy is an important skill set for leaders. And so often in like burned out workspaces, empathy is your edge. It encourages workers to stay with you. It makes them feel validated. Like when you have workers that feel seen and feel heard and feel recognized by leadership, the company does so much better. It progresses better, it grows better, it connects better as a culture. Those are all very important things. Empathy also allows for clarity. Like if someone is struggling at work and you talk to them and you're like, okay, I want to know what's going on. And they're like, I'm really struggling because like my dog just died or something like that. It's like, okay, now I understand why your workload is not where it usually is in the week. And let me be here with you because that sucks. And then just that kind of like recognition in the workplace can lead them to have better outcomes, can lead emotionally, but also your company to have better outcomes. Because true leadership isn't about dominance. And I think we've seen that way too much in films and in movies and in the narratives we're told. Dominance and leadership, they shouldn't necessarily coexist. Good leaders don't dominate those that follow. True leadership is about understanding them, understanding the people. Because control and fear might get compliance in the short term, but empathy gets commitment. It's the long-term strategy and better for everyone involved. So not only is empathy important as like an individual skill, it's also important for leaders to have. So it is really interesting that we see some political leaders being like, empathy is the bad thing. Empathy is what needs to go. And it's like, actually, if you were a decent leader, who, if you wanted long-term strategic outcomes, you would practice empathy because that's what gets people committed to your cause. That's what fosters understanding, not division, not dominance, not yelling, not all this other kind of stuff. Empathy is what whispers, I see you, even if I don't agree with you. And is that not what all great leaders do, or even just good people do? Empathy just completely dissolves division. And that's not meant to say that you won't have differences from someone, but it's meant to say that your differences don't subtract from your humanity. And I think practicing empathy is so fundamental to the human experience. And it is such a skill that we, especially now with the rise of populism and fascism, are seeing people try to attack. And it's like, this skill has existed since the dawn of our species, and it will exist long past every regime and every leader who exists now. Because it is so fundamental to who we are. Empathy is about witnessing things with courage. It's not a weakness. It's kind of like a quiet defiance of saying, I will not dehumanize you, even when the situation makes it easy. Whether you're an ocean apart or a party apart or whatever the case is, it's so easy to dehumanize people. It is so easy to be like, okay, they're subhuman. It's so easy to do that. And that is the skill set of empathy, is that you have to be able to be like, I will not dehumanize you. Like, holy fuck, is that ever hard? Because it is so difficult sometimes, especially when you are trying to humanize someone who doesn't recognize the humanity in you. This is where the boundaries aspect really comes in, is it's like, it's important to feel for everyone. It's important to empathize with everyone. It's important not to dehumanize any person or anyone. At the same time, you can humanize them and still not respect their actions. You can humanize them and still disagree with them. And that is all okay. It's just important that we realize that they are people with their own sets of like their own world, their own upbringing, like all these different things. And like upbringing has a large part in how we act as adults, but it's also people's responsibility as adults to be better humans. It is all of our jobs to be better people. And so that's where the hard boundary is. It's like you kind of have to determine that for yourself on like, I've met people who are completely pacifist pretty much. And like when someone says something disrespectful to them or to their group of people or to some other group of people, they let it go because they're like, I recognize the humanity of that person. I'm not really a conflict person. And if that's you, that's fine. That's obviously not me. And so for me, it's like my line is like, I will empathize with a person. I will not dehumanize a person. But when our values like come into conflict, or when when that person is dehumanizing a whole group of people, it's like then I'll go to bat. Like I don't really care at that point. And it's like I will still recognize that you are a human being, but I still have an obligation to hold true to my values too. And so it's like there's like a balance in there. And I think everyone has their own kind of way of determining that, but that's important. Courage and vulnerability never separate. If I can encourage you guys this week to listen longer, assume less potentially, and lean in with curiosity in more of your conversations, that's a great first step in empathy. In a culture that profits from disconnection, empathy is an act of rebellion. It's not the soft option, it's the brave one. Thanks for tuning in. If you had an aha moment or just enjoyed hanging out with me, pass this episode along to a friend, drop a quick review, and let's keep chatting over on Instagram. Sharing is caring and it helps this podcast grow. I'll see you in the next episode.